Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining this Aramaic word study class. I pray that you are finding it a real blessing. I know that I am, and I'm just glad to be able to pass it along to you. Again, please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any thoughts or questions. There's only a few of you on this email and on the YouTube subscribing list. So again, it's not meant to be a scholarly study, but to pass along some of just the beautiful things that I'm learning, and you can learn together with me. And I just pray that it is a blessing in your life. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Okay, and there you can see I have my screen split with two different viewing panes. On the left is the PDF creation of first chapter of the book of Acts, which I believe I sent to all of you. If you didn't receive it, please let me know and I'll email that to you. It has the hyperlinks in it. Wherever you see the blue letters, when you hover over them with your cursor, they will there's a cell there, so you may have to look around for it a little bit, but there's a cell there that you can uh, bring to the hyperlink. And so definitely want to make sure that you're doing that and getting the full use out of it. And that will hyperlink you to the dukrana.com. And that is the best that we have right now to look up these words. Again, those of you that are familiar with the Hebrew and working through Bible Hub, you have a lot more references to use in the Hebrew, and in the Syriac Aramaic there's not as many. So that's why we're forging ahead, learning as we go, trying to find the best help that I can pass on for you. And so we're in Acts chapter 1, verse 6. Again, when you look at the words, just as a reminder, they read from right to left, and the characters are the Syriac, and we're using the Western um, printing, Western Pashito, uh, mainly because the vowel pointings, the identification for the vowels are a lot clearer. I do prefer the Eastern Pashita. I feel that that's where I want to get to and read from eventually, but the vowel pointings use only a system of a cluster of dots above and below the letters, and again, we'll get there, but I thought it would be easier to use the Western script and the Western Pashto. They're very similar, but I prefer to base my studies on the Eastern church that was centered in Babylon, created by the Apostle Peter when he went there, rather than the Western manuscripts that were somewhat out of that realm and maybe a little more influenced by the Western Church and the Greek influence of Constantinople. So just personal preference, just again, for our studies, it's not going to make a bit of difference, but want to let you know that there is a difference in the manuscripts. So as we look at this, we see the first word. Again, this is not a verse that's filled with many revelatory or deep passages, but again, we can learn some very wonderful things. So it's Hinun Dain Kad Kenishin. Kenishin. And so I'm pronouncing it very much in modern Hebrew Reformed Judaism. And so the Hebrew underneath vowel pointings will reflect those pronunciations. Again, it's very different if you were to focus on a Eastern pronunciation or a Western pronunciation. There's different things, different sounds, different vowels, and so it's really interesting and can be really confusing. So we're going to just try to stay with something easy just to get exposed to the language right here. So this is kind of neat, that we look at the word that's kinishin, and it is the word for gather. And looking below the the verbs are the ones that kind of give us greater insight, because they have feeling, they have emotion to them. And so when we look at this word for gather, I already have it hyperlinked and opened up in the Dukrana. You'll see that on the right side of your screen, and you'll see that the verbs have voices to them. They don't have tenses per se, although you'll find some teachers that will refer to them as tenses, but most of them will say that Hebrew and Aramaic do not have tenses, but they have moods and they have voices, and they have two, we'll call them states, and one is completed and one is incompleted, or otherwise known as perfect and imperfect. And so when we get to the verb here, this word for G actually stands for a pial, and again, I'm using focusing on the letters like G, D, and C to try to not confuse it with Hebrew, because with Hebrew you have a PL, which is an intensive form in Hebrew, but a PL in Aramaic or Syriac is just the same as the Cal. It's the dictionary textbook form. And so that's where I'm trying to stay away from that. And so the letter G actually has a reference to a German word, but I like to look at it as just general. Just the textbook general dictionary form, no mood, no voice to it. That's defined or strongly put. There may be some things that do add somewhat of a voice to them later on. We'll examine those, but for right now, we're just going to look at this as a gathering. And so what I kind of like is this gathering is uh, going back to somewhat of a root of bringing crops in or harvesting. And remember, this is setting up to lead up to the day of Pentecost. It is the festival of the first fruits, Shavuot, as it's known in Hebrew. And so it's where they would bring the first grain in to signify the beginning of the barley harvest. So I was impressed when when I saw that word for gather is related to bringing in the crops or harvest, to glean post-harvest, as you see here in this lexicon explanation or translation. So I thought that was kind of cool. The other words here, shalui, to ask. The Vamrim is to say, Vamrin is to say, those of you that are knowledgeable in Hebrew will see the Aleph, Mem, and Resh here, and notice that that is a form of the word Amar, which are words that are used in everyday conversation, different from the other word that's used called Devar or Deber, meaning words from the heart. So again, this is not a deep conversation that's going on. It's kind of a transitional verse, and so it's using a little bit lighter text of the word Amar. Then we get down to the latter part of the text, which is Maran Ein Bahana Zavna. And so the word that we want to focus on here a little bit is this word for Lord, which is Maran. And so we're going to go ahead and looking at the hyperlink, you hold your cursor over that number. It pops up here with a little bit of flyout. Window tells you that you want to open it. And so we open it up and we get Maran. And we've talked about this word before, but to me, this is just a fantastic word. And this is what makes the Syriac, Aramaic, Peshitta, New Testament, have a lot of meaning and life to it over the Greek text. In the Greek, as I had mentioned, there are two words used for Lord and God, and that is Kyrios, and then the other one, I don't know why it escapes me right now, but it's Kyrios. And so that is the word that's used. That doesn't have the same connotation as going back into the Hebrew text, where here the Maran links us, as you see, scrolling down to obviously master, which is somewhat like Adonai that's used in the Hebrew, but it has a closer connection to the Yud-He Vav-He or the Tetragrammaton, and even mentions that it's a form of Maria. And Maria, I feel, is a Bereshit equivalent of the Yud He Vav He, or Yahweh, as some would like to pronounce it, in the Hebrew Bible. So I think that's where I get the richness out of this versus the Greek, which just have the two words. Um, so for Lord, one being Kyrios, and the other one will come to me as I think about it. But sorry, the other one we want to look at as we kind of close out this lesson here is mafne, and that is translated as return. And again, the whole mindset here is the disciples were not in a mindset of where the Lord was, and he was thinking on heavenly things, and they were not thinking on heavenly things. They were thinking on earthly things. And so they were wanting the kingdom to be restored to Israel, so that they would be free of these Roman rulers. And so that's all they were thinking of. And so God was not thinking in that realm. So here we see this word return, which I think is really, really cool. So I already have it opened in Dukrana, and it is has the mem, the pay, and then the noon somewhat at the beginning, the mem being maybe a preposition here, but the root being the pay and the noon, and brings out the word to return. And open it up, and you can read that. But what I want to point out is this is a verb, and it has a new symbol underneath that we haven't got to yet, and that is the V, and excuse me, the V for verb, and the A stands for a causative word, and it is the Aphel, and you'll see that's spelled Aphel, and this is also in an active participle. So we got two new verb identifications to just look at here a little bit. And so we're going to spend our last moments on it. Now, this Aphel is active. In verbs, there are active verbs and there are passive verbs. And so in the Syriac, it has fewer verb stems, or fewer verb conjugations is the right word, than Hebrew does. We have the simple, which is the cal, equivalent to the cal, but it's the PL, FPL. There's intensive, and then there's causative. Haven't come across anything that's reflexive yet, like the hitpael in the Hebrew. We don't seem to find one of those. Maybe we'll discover it, but it's not in the basic Syriac exposure to the verbs as what I'm constantly learning. So there's only 6 verb forms in the Syriac rather than the 7 that we get in Hebrew. But what's interesting here is Aphael. You will notice that like in Hebrew, to identify these, there are clues. There are verbs, vowels in here that allow you to kind of get a sound. Like in Hebrew, the PL, you can look at the word, and if you see the Hirik and you see the Sere combined with the Yod, you get that sound of EL, and it will be somewhat of a wake up or a identifier that this word might be in a PL intensive form. We have somewhat the same here. I noticed in some of the Syriac words, like the Aphel, you'll notice that there is the comets atop, which is the A sound, and then you have somewhat of a sere sound here with this little thing that looks like an umbrella, and that matches the sound of the Aphel. And so there's a little bit of a clue here that this would give you an indication that this verb might be in the Aphel form. Again, the whole verb structure in Syriac and Aramaic is not well defined, and there's many different interpretations of it and many different thought patterns. So that's why they've put this as a just a C here in the Dukrana, meaning that it's causative, meaning that something is causing. This is a feeling that's being caused. This is an action that's being caused. It's not in an intensive form, although it is active, but it is something that's happening to you and it's being caused. Like causative is he wrote or he caused to write. And so this is something that this return is being caused by someone. And of course, we know that the Lord sent the disciples to Jerusalem to wait for there to be a power from on high. The disciples didn't understand it, but now they're using words that are somewhat similar and saying, Jesus, will you now cause this return of the kingdom to Israel? And the fact that it's in a active participle, the participle of the word is like adding ing or er. It's something that's showing an action that's occurring, like writing, or he's a writer. There's some. That's the participle part of it. So this whole returning, you could put an ing on the end of this. Are you returning? Is the returner coming to Israel? And so they are very active in this, and knowing that the Lord would be the one causing this return, and I believe that's what would put it into the causative state. Then we have the word malchuta. Malkuta, which is very similar to the word, melech in Hebrew, which is the word for king, and malkut is the word for kingdom or reign in Hebrew. So again, we have a similar word that you'll recognize very quickly. And then the word for Israel, spelled a little bit different, but when you say it, you'll get the same phonetic sound of Yisrael, Rael, in the Syriac. So hope that wasn't too much grammar for you today. Again, just beautiful that we can have these tools to study the language the way we do. And very thankful for this ability to get into God's Word and be able to get these meanings in the New Testament that we have become so accustomed to studying in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament with the Hebrew language. So may God bless you, and may this all be for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to help you fall deeper in love with God, to fulfill the Vahavta, meaning to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So God bless you, and I pray you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Bye-bye.